we were, trying to come to terms with a lot of these sort of board game elements or whatever. And about halfway through the residency, we were like, oh, the sort of World Game Convention in Essen is happening in a few weeks.
Wow.
I think going into that, I was just like, oh yeah, I think board games are kind of cool. And coming away from that, I was like, oh no, something has awoken inside of me.
Welcome to Season 2, Episode 9 of 30 Minute Call, proudly presented by Canberra Theatre Centre and produced on the lands of the Ngunnawal people. We pay our respects to the traditional custodians and to their elders past, present and emerging. Yarn and g'day, my name is Joe Gleeson. This episode's guest is Nathan Harrison. He is from Boho Interactive, and it's kind of an exciting episode for us as we're talking about a show that is happening in the venue rather than one that has been postponed. It's very exciting. Today, we'll learn all about Boho Interactive and what this show called Canberra 2060 Futures with a capital F is all about, what they're doing, what's going on. Nathan's going to walk us through it, so let's get into it. Nathan, this is your 30-minute call. Here he is, joining me right now, Nathan from Boho Interactive. Hello.
Hi, Joe. How you doing?
Very well, mate. Very well. How are you? What have I caught you right in the middle of, mate, to drag you away from?
I think we're about to go in and do our tech run today, so it's all happening.
Very nice, very nice. The all-important tech run. Is there much tech stuff involved in this show that you're about to have kick off at the Canberra Theatre Centre?
There's a little bit, like we've got some, some AV and whatnot, and some sound stuff. Nothing too big on that, but I think the big thing for this show is that the audience will, for a number of the performances, be half online and half in the room. So we kind of have to figure out how all this streaming is going to work, and not just the tech part of that, but also the performative side. How do we run a game with people in the room and then a bunch of people watching from home? Yeah, which is an exciring challenge, but a challenge still.
That'll be great. Yeah, I'm sure you'll be an absolute master of it after the first couple of run-throughs. But
I reckon so.
before we delve too much further, I want to get you to sort of try and describe what this show is, because I got to experience a little bit of it yesterday, and I'm pumped for it. I reckon it's really cool.
Oh, great. That's good. So this show is called Canberra 2060 Futures with a capital F. It's a game where a bunch of people will play through the future of Canberra over the next, 4 or 5 decades or so, and kind of try and navigate all the potential threats that the 21st century is probably going to throw at all of us, and hopefully come out on top. And what we want is the show to kind of be a chance to think about and talk about kind of how we want cities to look in the future. What do we have to do to get there? How are we going to kind of deal with the things that we need to deal with?
Very cool. And it's it's part theatre, it's entertaining and it's funny. There's lots of laughs in there.
Good.
But also, it feels like a big board game that you get to play with, a bunch of people that you've never really met before, but also, there's the COVID stuff that you've got to take into account. So you've got your own little table and everything. Like it's really cool. It's interactive and social. You're getting out of the house, but it's, you're doing it in a safe way as well, which is nice.
Yeah, absolutely. That's that's been an interesting thing to try and build an interactive experience at the moment where, we can't have strangers sitting next to each other. We can't really pass things around a room or anything like that. So it's been an interesting set of constraints to work to try and be like, how do we try and still create a rich interactive experience where people feel like they're really contributing to what's happening, but I guess not physically so much.
Because this isn't your first rodeo with this kind of show, is it? Because you guys have created lots of similar sort of things, but like you say, like normally people would be right up in there with each other, working together and touching things and passing things around. And so you guys have had to come at this from a bit of a different angle this time. This is a bit more difficult, I would imagine.
Absolutely. So it's really been a case of trying to, I guess, go back to the drawing board and be like, what what are ways that we can give an audience agency over story? What are kind of rewarding ways for people to interact with a fiction, and kind of then just build it up from there, and try and find the safest ways for people to still feel like they're doing something with their hands, or at least just having a physical presence. I think for our practice, that's a really important part. Like and maybe this comes from a side that we're not tech heads. We don't have the set of skills to create video games or anything like that, but we think there's a real value to having a sort of game experience that's physical, that's in a room, that's social, that doesn't rely on kind of hidden algorithms in a computer screen or anything. That the entire machination of this game is kind of happening in the space with you at the same time. That's important to us. So
cool.
Trying to still create that in a safe way.
Are you a bit of a board game head yourself?
Yeah, big time.
Nice. So do you play games and go, that's a kind of cool thing, an element that we could include into one of our shows in the future?
Yeah, absolutely, all the time. Just I play a lot of board games. I really love. I think the thing I like most about board games is just learning a system of sitting down and being like, how do all these sort of components interact or whatever. And then I think the nice thing about board gaming and any sort of live gaming is that you're sitting down at a table or whatever with a group of people and you're saying, hey, we're all going to agree to behave a certain way or to follow a certain set of restrictions. And we're going to do that because we think that there's going to be a good experience or an interesting experience that comes out of that. We think that there'll be an idea that reveals itself if we all follow these rules. And that's very cool, I think.
I love a board game. I love it. And that sort of was like a family thing for me as a kid growing up. We'd sort of sit around the table and have a crack at a board game. And I reckon as the years have gone by, I've sort of realised that board games have gotten a lot cooler and a lot more involved, and there's so much more creativity going on with them rather than just roll a dice and move or Monopoly or whatever. It's really cool. So I can't understand people who go, man, board games, I'm not into that. I'm like, how can you not be? It's so good.
There's so much happening. I remember because the first project I sort of joined Boho Interactive for, this company, was back in 2012, and it was a residency in the UK. And we were, trying to come to terms with a lot of these sort of board game elements or whatever. And about halfway through the residency, we were like, the sort of World Game Convention in Essen is happening in a few weeks.
Wow.
Let's just go to that, and let's just immerse ourselves in this completely overwhelming weekend. And I think going into that, I was just like, I think board games are kind of cool. And coming away from that, I was like, oh no, something has awoken inside of me.
That's brilliant. So what kind of games would you say, for someone who's a bit of a board game skeptic, to try and lure them in, what's a good sort of start out game for them to have a crack at?
That's a good question. Obviously Catan is a classic, but I think it's this kind of board gaming has come a long way since then as well. So there's a lot of newer stuff that can kind of scratch that itch. The same with Ticket to Ride. It's just classic sort of entry board game. But I think in terms of newer stuff that's really cool, I've had a lot of fun with this game called Quacks of Quedlinburg. It's been a great one to just show people.
That sounds great.
You're medieval doctors making potions that hopefully don't explode.
Amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
As you were saying before, you've done a bit of stuff with Boho overseas. You've performed at London Science Museum, Stockholm Resilience Centre, the Earth Observatory in Singapore. That must be a great experience to be able to, just perform and create in all these different spaces.
It's been pretty unreal. I quite often reflect on how lucky I am to have sort of had the experiences I had. I've got the email from David in Boho back in 2011, I think, where he's like, hey, I'm doing this thing in London. We don't know each other heaps well, but I think you might be a good fit for this project. Do you want to jump on? And I think back to that email so much as this kind of weird turning point that, I was like, I guess I'll just take a gamble on this and lose all my money and live in London for a couple of months.
Not a cheap place to live. So what was your role when you first came on board with Boho, and how has that sort of evolved as time's gone by?
Well, I guess that first project, I was just part of the creative team. We were trying to make a live game that, for that project, it was a game that kind of reflected the scientific process of modeling, and could kind of walk people through the sort of processes that scientists go through when they make like climate models, atmosphere models, all this kind of thing,
Mm.
so that a bunch of people could kind of, I guess, not just have the language and it's like, oh, well, this means, all these terms that scientists use, you actually know them. Like, we all know what a feedback loop, because we actually experience them every day. If I'm embarrassed and I start blushing and I realize I'm blushing and I get more embarrassed, like that's a feedback loop.
Yeah, right.
Like, we all know that. But when scientists say, oh, we have a feedback loop happening in Antarctica with the ice sheets, that can sometimes be a bit, I guess, hard to connect with.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were trying to build a game where people would come away thinking, oh, I played this game about collecting garbage at a music festival, and that was about feedback loops. And I think I actually have an experience and I can connect that to my own experiences now. So I've kind of got the tools to think better about how scientists and experts are talking about the world.
Oh, cool.
Which was a cool process. And, I came in not really knowing a lot of the science myself, so it was a real learning curve.
Yeah, yeah. And you're hosting or co-hosting, I believe, as well, while you're here in Canberra. Has that always been part of your role as like the charismatic guy who's leading people through these great games?
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you for saying charismatic.
Only speaking the truth, mate.
Yeah, I mean, so before I joined Boho, I had a sort of background in interactive theatre.
Yeah, right.
And so, yeah, that's definitely, I guess, part of my role is often for the Boho shows is to be one of the presenters and try and lead people through, which is fun and always a bit, like any sort of interactive theatre, like it's good stuff that keeps you on your toes. You can't just deliver the same script because people are going to do and say things differently every night.
Yeah.
You have to be a little bit agile, I guess.
It's great, like seeing you, I only got a small glimpse of the game the other day, but I could see you sort of, you were thinking on your feet and using those improv skills that obviously you have, and it's great. It's really cool to see. Both have been performing since 2006. How has the work sort of evolved since then? Is it quite different from when it first started?
Yeah, I mean, I think when the guys started the company, it kind of just came out of a necessity to be able to make their own work. I think a lot of the early plays, they just wanted to put on pincer plays and do their own productions.
Yeah, right.
But soon they kind of found an interest in representing things like game theory and network theory and all those sorts of things on a stage and letting an audience play with them. And out of that came, I guess, desire to start collaborating with scientists. So I think that's
cool.
Thinking about what the Boho process is now, it's absolutely, the kind of foundation of any show is a lot of conversations with experts and scientists. For this show as well, we've been talking with emergency management and urban planners and all kinds of people. And so, yeah, we're kind of just interested in what conversations these experts are having. What are they thinking about? What are they worried about? And then taking that as a launching point to be like, cool, where's the game in this? What can people play out of this conversation?
Yeah, nice. And when you're in those different countries that you guys have been to, do you have to adapt the show much because you're dealing with different sort of cultures and that sort of stuff? Or
yeah, a little bit. I mean, our first show in London, we tried to make it was about a music festival, so an audience would manage a music festival, and even just that as a cultural touch point is quite different in the UK, where they have multi-day camping festivals with hundreds of thousands of people, to in Australia where we have a muddy field for a day or two and like a tenth of the audience is outside. So there's definitely things like that happen, but yeah, culturally as well. We worked on a project in Sweden that was about a nature reserve. And it was sort of a nature reserve that had a lot of different pressures on it. There's, it was a really beautiful area for biodiversity. There were a lot of threatened species there. But there was a Romani camp that also had been living there for decades. And then sort of, because Sweden had recently taken on, I think, 500,000 refugees from Syria, there was starting to be a lot of pressure to maybe build public housing there.
Yeah, right.
And so the show was trying to just ask the question, how do we value our natural spaces, and like, what do we want from them? But that was a really interesting process, just because, we were going into a space with a lot of cultural and social realities that we weren't a part of, and required a lot of, I guess, communication and collaboration with those people.
Yeah, great. Very cool. Nathan, I want to ask you a big question now. You're going to be in the driver's seat, excuse me, for a lot of Canberra 2060, but I'm going to throw you into the I guess the player's seat. What do you think? And I suppose you've got a little bit of ammunition in your tool belt, because you've been speaking to scientists in building this game. But what do you actually think is going to be the biggest problem facing Canberrans in 2060, mate?
I mean, it's a lot, right? I mean, heat, I think, is just going to be...
Yeah.
I guess, like, and maybe it's a cop-out answer, but I think the problem is that all of the issues are just so connected, and none of them are going to happen in isolation. So, I mean, this year is a perfect example of that, between the bushfires and the hail and COVID, like, none of those things sort of happened with enough space for anyone to resolve things or really, like, decompress socially.
Yeah, true.
Things don't happen in isolation. We think a lot about, like, how, a storm can easily happen in the middle of, like, a city's social problem or anything like that. So as much as it's a cop-out answer, I think the problem is that everything will happen at once. We'll be, having severe heat waves at the same time as dealing with a drought and bushfire smoke and storms and all that sort of thing. But then at the same time, we'll have, 40 years from now, like, there'll be people moving away from the coast. We'll probably have people moving, into Australia from the Pacific potentially as sea level rises, and all those things have, like, big social knock-on events as well. So, like, how does the city handle a heat wave when it's just taken in an extra few thousand refugees and things like that?
Yeah.
How do you sort of build the social trust and cohesion that you need to solve those problems while you keep having environmental problems happening at the same time?
Yeah.
Which is scary. I mean, we're going to have to deal with it, and we're going to have to be pretty cluey, I think, and courageous with how we work together. But it's going to be tricky.
Hopefully there's a lot of work done between now and 2060 so that a lot of those scary things that you're talking about don't actually come into fruition. We don't have to deal with them.
Yeah. I think one of the things that a scientist we spoke with said to me that really stuck with me this whole process is, when thinking, towards the future, whether it's 2060 or even 2100 or anything like that, there are going to be big problems that need big solutions. And it's really hard to put that in, like, anything like that in place now. But the kind of prompt that the scientist said was, like, if I can't affect the change that I want now, what do I have to do that so that in 5 years' time, the person in my position then can do what I want? Like, what are the kind of building blocks, the stepping stones that I can start putting in place, so that the people trying to deal with this after me maybe have a better time or better equipped or something.
Yeah. Oh, it's nice to hear that. You're chatting to scientists that are so forward thinking like that as well. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have to be, because
it's bleak otherwise.
It's going to be an interesting century.
Yeah. Well, mate, I'm really looking forward to hearing how everyone deals with all the problems that you're going to throw their way in Canberra 2060 Futures with a capital F. F for fun, F for futures, F for frivolity. It's going to be really, really cool. As we're recording this, it's not too far away. 31st of August to the 5th of September 2020. Make sure you get along. Grab a drink. Be a villain. Be a nice guy. Like, if you're short of villains as well, Nathan. Like, I'm always up for that. I love being a villain in a board game.
Yeah, I think we've definitely tried to build a game that lets people be villains a little bit.
Perfect. You got to have that. Well, mate, have fun with it. It sounds really, really great. And thanks for taking the time to have a chat to me.
No, pleasure. Thanks so much.